Everything changed while you were in the hospital. This house is no longer yours. You have no place here. Find somewhere else to live." I froze. The wound, still unhealed, throbbed painfully. I couldn't believe those words were coming from the mouth of my only son, the one I had dedicated my entire life to. I had only been hospitalized for 3 weeks due to complications from my hip surgery. I returned with the hope of being reunited with my loved ones, only to find the door shut on the home Anthony and I had built patiently over 30 years. In that instant, I understood the betrayal. It wasn't just about losing my home, it hit a darker plot I couldn't yet grasp. If you've ever wondered what happens when a mother is pushed to her absolute limit, keep reading and tell me in the comments below which city you're reading this from. My hospital discharge papers crinkled in my pocket as the taxi pulled up to my classic style house. 21 days had felt like an eternity. Complications from my hip surgery had kept me battling fever and infection while the world continued to spin without me. I was exhausted but relieved to finally be home. Home, the 2-story house that Anthony and I had lovingly restored during our 30 years of marriage, stood before me, bathed in the late afternoon light. The roses I'd planted decades ago still bloomed by the walkway, though they clearly needed tending after my absence. "Need help with your bags, Mum?" the driver asked, glancing at my cane. "Just to the door, please," I replied, my voice raspy from the dry hospital air. "My son should be waiting." The front door opened before we reached it. Richard, my only son, stood in the doorway, but not with the smile I expected. Instead, his face wore an expression I'd never seen: cold, distant, resolute. His voice echoed that same dry, formal tone. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of movement in the living room, his wife, Veronica. And were those her parents? "Richard, what's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. He blocked the entrance, not moving aside. "You shouldn't have come. We were expecting you tomorrow." The taxi driver set my small suitcase beside me, sensing the tension. I paid him quickly, suddenly wishing he wouldn't leave. "There's no easy way to say this," Richard continued as the taxi pulled away. "Things changed while you were hospitalized. This house is no longer yours." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with my still recovering body. "What are you talking about?" "We made arrangements. Veronica's parents needed to move from Dallas, and this house has much more space than you need. The documents are already signed. You'll have to find somewhere else to live." My mind struggled to process his words. Documents? I hadn't signed anything. "Richard, this is absurd. Let me into my house right now." I stepped forward again, leaning heavily on my cane. This time, Veronica appeared beside him. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore what I immediately recognized as my emerald earrings, Anthony's gift for our 25th anniversary. "Isabella," she said with that false sweetness I had learned to identify over the years, "we've already packed your personal belongings. They're in boxes in the garage. We can send them wherever you're staying." From behind them, Veronica's parents, Raymond and Claudia Sterling, emerged. Over the years, I'd barely seen them more than a few times. Raymond, tall and elegantly athletic, with silver hair, had always struck me as arrogant. Claudia, with her perpetually judgmental expression, never bothered to hide her disdain for my modest home, the very house she now stood in as if she owned it. "I'm sorry it came to this," Raymond said, sounding not at all apologetic. "But Richard made the arrangements very clear. The house was legally transferred." "Legally?" I managed to stammer. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." Richard's face hardened. "Power of attorney. Remember those papers you signed before your surgery for medical decisions? They also included financial matters." The revelation hit me like a punch. Yes, I had signed a stack of documents handed to me by my own son. While I was anxious about the operation, I trusted him blindly. I hadn't even read past the first page. You tricked me, I said. The words sounded hollow, insufficient against the magnitude of the betrayal. We're doing what's best for everyone, Veronica interjected. This house is too much for you to maintain alone. Richard has been managing it for years. Don't show up here again, Richard finished firmly. We'll send your things. The decision is final. I stood there, leaning on my cane, staring at the son I had raised, the boy I'd told bedtime stories to, the teenager I'd taught to drive, the man whose college tuition I'd paid by working extra shifts. Now he was a stranger wearing my son's face. This is illegal, I said softly, and you know it. It's done, he replied coldly. Don't make it harder. Something broke inside me, but not in the way they expected. No tears, no pleas. It was a freezing clarity, a determination I hadn't felt since my years overseeing bank compliance. Enjoy it then, I said simply, turning away. Enjoy everything. The confusion on their faces at my calmness almost made the devastation worth it. Almost. As I limped toward the taxi, I'd had the foresight to ask it to wait. I pulled out my phone, not to call the police, not yet. That would come later in my own time, in my own way. Instead, I sent a single message to Gloria Evans. Plan B. The hotel room in downtown Phoenix was impersonal, but clean, a temporary refuge, while I regained my strength and clarity. My hands still trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Gloria replied immediately, "Stay safe. I'm on my way." Gloria Evans and I had been friends for 40 years, ever since college. She had become a formidable lawyer, while I had built my career in bank compliance. After Anthony's death, she'd helped me organize my affairs with a meticulousness born of our shared professional paranoia. Always have a backup plan, she'd advised, especially when it came to family money. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now, her foresight seemed almost prophetic. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Despite the late hour, Gloria looked impeccable in her tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in her characteristic bun. Her expression, however, was pure fury. "Those miserable vultures," she whispered with rage as she hugged me carefully, mindful of my still recovering body. "Are you all right, physically or emotionally?" I attempted a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Both." She placed her briefcase on the desk and began pulling out files with practiced efficiency. "I'm standing, which is something. The rest," I said, falling back onto the bed. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and all of this will be a nightmare caused by a fever." Gloria's expression softened for a moment before she regained her professional mask. "I've already started the process. The trust documentation is solid. Anthony was meticulous. The house transfer won't withstand legal scrutiny." "How long?" I asked. "To invalidate this fraudulent transfer? A few weeks, maybe months if they decide to play dirty." She paused. "But Isabella, there's something else. Something I found while reviewing your accounts." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Unusual withdrawals from your investment accounts during your hospitalization. Large withdrawals." She handed me a printed statement. I scanned it quickly. My banking experience immediately detected the irregularities. 5 transfers totaling over $220,000. All to accounts I didn't recognize. All made with digital signatures purportedly from me. While I was barely conscious in the ICU, I whispered, feeling the full weight of the betrayal. "They didn't just take my house, they've been draining my accounts." "There's something worse," Gloria continued gravely. "My legal assistant did a preliminary check on the Sterlings. Their real estate consulting business in Dallas has several complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn before formal investigations began, and Veronica's LinkedIn profile shows experience at 3 mortgage companies that ended up closing due to regulatory violations. Everything clicked with chilling clarity. Are they involved in some kind of mortgage fraud? Gloria nodded. And they've likely been planning it for months, waiting for the right moment. Your hospitalization gave them the perfect opportunity to accelerate their plans. My mind raced back to conversations from the past year, Veronica's growing interest in my finances, Richard's seemingly casual questions about my bank accounts and contacts. The foundation of this betrayal had been built long before my surgery. Richard, I said, his name catching in my throat. Do you think he knows what they're doing? Gloria's silence was answer enough. I taught him better than that, I murmured, barely audible. His father taught him better too, Gloria replied, her tone soft but firm. People change, Isabella, especially when money is involved. The question now is, what do you want to do about it? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 67 years dedicated to building a career, a family, a home. When I opened them, something inside me had hardened. Everything, I answered. I want to do everything possible to reclaim what's mine and make them face the consequences. Everyone, even Richard. Gloria's eyebrow barely arched. No maternal protection clause, I said. He made his choice. Saying it hurt, but it was true. If he's involved in something illegal, he deserves what's coming. She nodded, satisfied with my determination. Then we'll have to be smart, strategic. I have contacts in the FBI Financial Crimes Unit who would be very interested in what we've uncovered. I have some contacts too, I replied, thinking of former colleagues. But I don't want to move too quickly. They think I'm defeated, a helpless old woman who will quietly retreat. That perception gives us an advantage. What are you thinking? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook, my lifeline during my banking years. First, we document everything, every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie told. Then we follow the money trail. If they're setting up a fraud, there will be patterns. Gloria smiled, that sharp, predatory smile I remembered from our youth. And then, I said, feeling a cold determination course through me, we spring the trap when they least expect it. We began to outline the plan. My phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Mum, we need the passwords to your investment accounts to transfer the remaining funds for your care. Send them as soon as possible. I showed the message to Gloria, who shook her head in disgust. What do I say? I asked. Nothing yet, she replied. Let them wonder, let them worry. I nodded, setting the phone aside. The old Isabella would have responded instantly, eager to calm the waters, to maintain peace at any cost. But that Isabella had been left behind at the door of the house they stole from me. This Isabella was playing the long game, holed up in a hotel room. I reconnected with my best friend and lawyer, Gloria, who revealed shocking news. Not only had they seized my house, but they were also draining my accounts while I was hospitalized. Upon discovering suspicious movements in the Sterling's business history, I had to confront the heartbreaking possibility that my own son was involved in something truly sinister. Still recovering physically, but firmer in my resolve, I made a key decision. Instead of confronting them immediately, I would let them believe they had won while I silently built the case that would be their undoing. You have to see this, Gloria said, sliding her laptop across the hotel desk. 3 days had passed since my humiliating eviction. We had moved to a more comfortable extended stay suite, paying cash to leave no electronic traces. My physical strength was slowly returning, though the emotional wounds remained raw. The screen displayed property records from my neighborhood. I squinted, reviewing the document. The third property from the bottom, Gloria indicated, My eyes widened in shock. The Miller family, 2 houses down, had sold their home 3 months ago. The buyers, Sterling Investment Properties, LLC. That can't be a coincidence, I murmured. Even better, Gloria said, flipping through more documents. The Henderson family across the street had sold to the same company last month, and the retired couple on the corner already had their house under contract with that same buyer. They're buying up the whole neighborhood, I whispered, watching the scheme take shape. But why? Gloria opened a zoning request filed with the city planning department 2 weeks ago while I was still in the hospital. They submitted this proposal to change the zoning for the entire block from single-family residential to mixed-use commercial. The news hit me like a punch. My neighborhood was right on the edge of downtown Phoenix's rapidly expanding district. With the new zoning, property values would skyrocket. They're using my house as headquarters while they buy up the other homes around it, I said, suddenly understanding how all the pieces fit together. As soon as they control enough of the block, they can force the change and values will at least triple, Gloria finished. With current market prices, we're talking about a potential profit of between $15 and $20 million. My banking experience immediately grasped the magnitude of the plan, but they needed enormous initial capital to start buying. Where would they get it from? Gloria's expression darkened. That's where it gets concerning. I asked an investigator friend to check some records. The Sterlings have a history in Dallas. They identify vulnerable homeowners, mostly seniors or those with financial troubles, and use predatory loans to seize their properties. Mortgage fraud, I said, remembering the term well from my years at the bank. Exactly, they offer refinancing that's too good to be true. They manipulate appraisals with false reports and structure the loans in such a way that they inevitably fail. When the owners can't pay, they swoop in and buy the properties for a fraction of their worth. I thought of my neighbors, many of them elderly, living on fixed incomes in homes they'd owned for decades. Perfect victims. And my accounts, I realized. The money they've been transferring is surely the initial capital. They needed funds for the first purchases and to cover expenses until the plan paid off. My investment portfolio was the most convenient source. The calculated cruelty of it all took my breath away. It wasn't just about my home and my money. It was about using it to destroy my entire community. People who had been at Anthony's funeral, who had brought me food when I became a widow. And Richard? I asked, finally voicing the doubt that had haunted me. How involved is he? Gloria hesitated before opening another folder. This was recorded 3 weeks ago at the Dallas First National Bank. The security video showed Richard and Veronica entering the bank together and meeting with a loan officer. The timestamp showed it was 2 days after my surgery, while I was still heavily sedated in the ICU. I realized they had used the power of attorney to open my safe deposit box. I understood this when I recognized the bank where I kept my important documents. Yes, and according to the access log, Gloria confirmed, they removed several items, including the original deed to your property and the trust papers. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed for a moment. My own son, the boy who once demanded absolute fairness when playing board games, who had returned a wallet with $50 inside. How could he have become this person? There's something else you should see, Gloria said softly, showing me a chain of emails. My contacts at the SEC sent these to me. The Sterlings have been on their radar for a while. The emails were between Veronica and her father, dated almost 8 months ago. They discussed their plans in thinly veiled language, pointing out properties in my neighborhood, evaluating which owners could be prey to their deceptions. And most disturbing, they mentioned my house as their operation center once they gained control of it. One particular phrase chilled my blood. Still hesitant but yielding, it says mother unlikely to fully recover from scheduled surgery. Accelerated timeline. Scheduled surgery? I repeated almost a whisper. My hip replacement wasn't an emergency. It had been scheduled months in advance. Isabella. Gloria's voice sounded like a warning, as if preparing me for a blow. They were waiting for this. They knew I would be vulnerable after surgery. I continued, the horrible truth dawning on me. They were counting on it. We don't know if Richard understood the full extent. Gloria started. Enough, I raised my hand, unable to accept any more excuses for my son. He knew enough. He knew they wanted my house, my money. He knew they were planning something while I was incapacitated. The pain of that certainty was sharper than any surgical blade. My own son had not only betrayed me, but he had done so with calculation and coldness. I stood ignoring the protest from my recovering hip and walked to the window. The Phoenix skyline gleamed under the sunset, indifferent to my human tragedy unfolding in its streets. "What do you want to do?" Gloria asked softly. I turned to her, my decision crystal clear. "I want justice," I replied simply. "Not just for myself, but for everyone, for those they've cheated or planned to cheat. And I want my house back." Gloria nodded, serious but firm. "Then we'll have to move cautiously. They think they've already won. That gives us the element of surprise." "Good," I replied. A plan was already forming in my head, because I was about to give them the surprise of their lives. As I reviewed the property records with Gloria, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Sterlings had been systematically buying homes throughout my neighborhood, preparing an ambitious rezoning plan worth millions. The betrayal hurt even more when I discovered evidence that Richard wasn't just an opportunist. He had known about the plans for months. He might even have calculated the takeover to coincide precisely with my surgery. With my community and my longtime neighbors endangered by their predatory scheme, my resolve hardened. It was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about stopping a sophisticated fraud operation before more vulnerable people fell victim, and I was precisely the person who knew how to do it. "Isabella, are you sure about this?" Gloria asked with concern, watching me apply makeup in the hotel bathroom mirror. "Your hip is still healing." "I spent 21 days in that hospital bed feeling helpless," I replied, applying lipstick with a steady hand. "I'm done with helplessness." A week had passed since my eviction. In that time, Gloria and I had meticulously reconstructed how the Sterling's operation worked. Their business in Dallas had left a trail of financial victims, seniors who lost everything through predatory contracts and forged documents. Now they were replicating the same scheme in Phoenix, using my house as their base. "The timing has to be perfect," I reminded her, giving myself a final look in the mirror. My elegant grey pantsuit and discreet jewellery projected exactly the image I wanted. Not a defeated old woman, but a banking professional with decades of experience. "The agents are quiet," Gloria confirmed. "They're ready. They'll only act when we give the signal." After discovering the magnitude of the scam, we had taken our evidence to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. The agents had been building a case against the Sterlings for months, but they lacked the internal access we could now offer. We struck a deal. The delay of immediate apprehension was granted to allow us to compile more substantial evidence. In exchange, I was to be given precedence in the recovery of my assets. It's crucial to recall that we require documented proof of their exploitation of my identity and financial details. I outlined the core components of our strategy: access to bank accounts, falsified signatures, and explicit acknowledgement of their scheme. Without this documentation, they could plausibly assert that I had voluntarily relinquished everything. Gloria glanced at her watch, a subtle nod of confirmation. Veronica's customary weekly salon visit was commencing in 30 minutes, ensuring her absence for a minimum of 2 hours. Raymond and Claudia were engaged in a property viewing across town. According to Richard's schedule, he wouldn't be returning from work until 5 o'clock. It was a perfect confluence of circumstances. My son's predictable habits, once a source of endearment, had now become my tactical advantage. I inhaled deeply, centering myself. "Let's proceed," I stated. The taxi deposited me 2 blocks from my residence. I ambled along, wielding my cane more as a prop to feign frailty than for genuine support. The neighborhood retained its familiar charm, with meticulously maintained gardens, established homes, and the venerable oak on the corner, the very tree where Richard had once constructed his childhood fort. Yet, a profound sense of alteration permeated my perception, tinged with the stark certainty of clandestine machinations. As I neared the house, subtle shifts became apparent. The rose bushes I had nurtured for years were absent, supplanted by commonplace flora. The porch furnishings, painstakingly restored by Anthony and me, were gone. The metamorphosis was underway, systematically effacing the remnants of our family's presence. I bypassed the main entrance, opting instead for the side access leading to the kitchen. In my frantic departure for the hospital, I had neglected to secure this lock. For years, this had been our clandestine entry point. Richard, during his adolescent years, had utilized it to slip in after curfew, under the misguided impression that I was unaware. The lock yielded smoothly to the key. I entered with hushed steps, catching only the faint murmur of unfamiliar voices emanating from my study. Following the sound, I halted before the partially ajar door. "The agreement with the Miller family is slated for Friday," a masculine voice declared, which I recognized as Raymond Sterling's. "Once that's finalized, we will command 40% of the block." "And the Henderson property?" another voice inquired, presumably a business associate. "That has already been addressed. We utilized Mrs. Hayes's banking credentials to secure the financing. It's as clean as can be." My grip tightened on my cane. They were leveraging my name and financial standing to orchestrate their fraudulent endeavors, precisely the evidence we needed. I initiated the recording function on my mobile device before pushing the door fully open. The scene before me was frozen like a tableau. Raymond Sterling occupied Anthony's antique desk, his associate standing by the window. All 3 turned towards me, their faces etched with undisguised astonishment. "Hello, Raymond," I announced calmly. "Discussing business in my study?" "Isabella," he stammered, rising to his feet. "This is quite unexpected. How did you gain entry?" "Through the door," I responded directly. "The same door to the residence that legally remains mine." His partner, a man in his early 30s, appeared visibly uncomfortable. "Would you prefer I return at a later time, Mr. Sterling?" "There's no need," I interjected before Raymond could speak. "I merely came to retrieve some personal documents." Raymond's expression hardened. "This property is no longer yours. Richard was very explicit about that." "Indeed he was," I acknowledged, moving towards the filing cabinet. "Quite clear about his intentions, just as you are about utilizing my banking credentials for your financing operations." Color drained from Raymond's face. "I have no idea what you're referring to." I opened the cabinet drawer and extracted a folder. "The Henderson property, using my data to secure funds. I just overheard your discussion." The associate began to edge towards the exit. "Mr. Sterling, I believe I should leave." "Isabella is perhaps disoriented," Raymond stated brusquely. "Her recent hospitalization has affected her mental state, hasn't it, Isabella?" I offered a chilling smile as I closed the drawer. "My mind is perfectly lucid, clear enough to comprehend the plot you, Claudia, and Veronica are devising." clear enough to question whether my son truly grasps the legal ramifications of the fraud he is facilitating. Raymond's demeanor shifted, the facade of concern dissolved, revealing pure, calculated menace. You have no tangible proof, and even if you did, no one would believe you over your own son. Now, leave before I summon the authorities and have you removed for trespassing. I nodded, as if weighing his assertion. You are correct on one point, Raymond. Evidence is paramount. I raised my phone, clearly displaying the active recording application. That's precisely why I ensured its capture. His eyes widened with fury, all pretense of surprise vanishing. Give me that phone. I think not. I retreated towards the door, my heart hammering, though I maintained an outward composure. I have what I came for. Enjoy the residence while you still can. As I turned to depart, Raymond lunged, his grip tightening on my arm with bruising force. You're not leaving with that recording. I had not anticipated a physical confrontation. A sharp pain shot through my still healing hip as I struggled to maintain my balance. Release me, I demanded, deliberately raising my voice. Hand over the phone first, he growled, attempting to seize it with his other hand. At that precise moment, the front door burst open. FBI, hands where we can see them. Agents Rips and Callahan stormed in, weapons drawn. Raymond froze, then slowly relinquished his hold on my arm, raising his hands. Our contingency plan, activated by the panic button on my phone, had executed flawlessly. Isabella Hayes. Agent Rips approached as her partner apprehended Raymond. Are you unharmed? Yes, I replied, leaning against the doorframe, and I believe I have something that will prove most interesting. Taking a calculated risk, I had returned to my home, capitalizing on Veronica's absence and entering through a forgotten side door to confront Raymond Sterling amidst his discussion of fraudulent activities. Faced with this revelation, his initial surprise gave way to a menacing posture, compelling our FBI contacts to intervene earlier than anticipated. Although the confrontation escalated physically, I succeeded in securing the critical evidence, a recording of Raymond's explicit admission to using my banking credentials in his illicit scheme. As he was being led away in handcuffs, I understood that this was merely the initial phase in dismantling their entire operation. The true test would commence when my son discovered the unfolding events and realized his mother was instrumental in the Sterling's downfall. The FBI office exuded a sterile, impersonal chill, beige walls, utilitarian furnishings, and the faint aroma of coffee and paper. I awaited proceedings in an interview room, my hip throbbing despite the potent pain reliever Agent Rips had provided. Mrs. Hayes, Agent Callahan remarked, closing his notebook. Your recording is of immense value. Combined with the financial documentation you and Ms. Evans have supplied, we possess sufficient grounds to obtain search warrants for all Sterling properties and records. And my residence? I inquired. And my accounts? A judge has already issued an emergency order freezing any transactions pertaining to your property, he assured me. No one can sell or transfer it until legal ownership is definitively established. A profound sense of relief washed over me, though I recognized this was merely the nascent stage. The Sterlings were in custody, yet Richard and Veronica remained oblivious to the events that had transpired. What happens next? I sought to know. We will execute search warrants at their residence this evening, Rips elaborated. Mrs. Sterling will be taken in for questioning. As for your son, the agent hesitated, her professional tone softening slightly. Based on your statements, we will need to ascertain the extent of his potential involvement. The door swung open, revealing Gloria, her expression a mixture of seriousness and satisfaction. The initial court orders had just been received. Simultaneous action was being taken against the Sterling's offices in Dallas. Mrs. Hayes, Callahan stated cautiously. "We understand this situation is complex. If you would prefer not to be present during the execution of the warrant at your home, I can accompany you." "I will be there," I interjected firmly. "This is my home. I intend to see this through to its conclusion." 3 hours later, I was situated in an unmarked FBI vehicle, parked opposite my former residence. The fading evening light cast elongated shadows across the lawn where Richard had once played as a child. Veronica's car was in the driveway. She had returned from her salon appointment, entirely unaware that her father was undergoing processing at the Federal Detention Center. "In position," Rips murmured from the driver's seat, monitoring updates via her earpiece. Mrs. Sterling Hayes, confirmed inside, along with her daughter, arrived earlier than anticipated. My heart constricted. Richard was not scheduled to be home yet. I had hoped to spare him the public spectacle that was imminent. I had even made arrangements for him to be approached separately at his office. Now he would face the full brunt of the raid alongside his wife. "Are you certain you wish to witness this?" Gloria asked, placing her hand over mine. Before I could respond, a convoy of vehicles appeared down the street. 3 unmarked sedans and a tactical van. They pulled up in front of my house, and agents disembarked with synchronized precision, some clad in the distinctive FBI jackets. "Federal agents, we have a warrant." The pronouncement echoed clearly in the hushed neighborhood as they approached the front door. I couldn't discern the response from within, but the door opened. A moment later, from my vantage point, I could see Veronica in the entryway, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. Behind her, Richard appeared, positioning himself protectively beside his wife. "It's time," Rips announced, opening her door. "Please remain behind us." As we crossed the street, neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. I felt their curious, concerned gazes, some perhaps relishing the unfolding drama. Veronica was the first to notice me approaching behind the agents, her carefully maintained composure shattered. "You!" she spat, her voice escalating hysterically. "You did this!" Richard's eyes met mine, his expression transforming from bewilderment to horror as he realized I was with the federal agents, not being apprehended like them. "Mom," his voice cracked slightly, "what is happening?" "Your mother has provided evidence of large-scale financial fraud committed by the Sterling family," Agent Callahan stated formally. "We have a warrant to search these premises and confiscate all relevant documents and electronic devices." "Fraud?" Richard repeated, a look of genuine confusion on his face. "What fraud? This is preposterous." "It is," I affirmed, advancing, my cane tapping a steady rhythm against the ground. "Raymond was quite explicit this morning about using my banking credentials to secure fraudulent financing right in my study, in my home." Veronica's face drained of all color. "You are here? How did you manage that?" "The side door," I replied simply. "There are certain aspects of this house you never bothered to acquaint yourself with, Veronica, such as the fact that it legally belongs to a trust established by my late husband, which cannot be transferred without the signatures of all trustees, including Gloria, who most certainly never signed anything." Richard looked between me and his wife, his desperation mounting. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding. We wanted to help you by pilfering my house, depleting my accounts, settling your in-laws into a property scheme, exploiting my financial reputation." My voice remained firm despite the internal tempest of emotions. "That is not assistance, Richard. That is fraud. That is theft." "Mrs. Sterling Hayes, we need you to accompany us for questioning," Rips interjected, gesturing towards one of the vehicles. Veronica's surprise gave way to a veneer of calculated calm. "I wish to have my legal counsel present. I will not make any statements without representation. That is your prerogative, Callahan acknowledged before turning to Richard. Mr. Thompson will also require your statement. I don't understand, Richard said, his voice hollow. Mum, what have you done? The question, so inverted, so revealing of his inability to acknowledge his own culpability, struck me with the force of a physical blow. What have I done? I echoed, gazing directly at him. I have protected myself and others from individuals who believe they can seize whatever they desire without consequence. I instilled better values in you than this, Richard. Your father did. As agents escorted Veronica towards a waiting vehicle, she turned, her venom unexpected. You believe you have triumphed? You have no conception of what will transpire when my father's legal team becomes involved? Your father is already in custody, I interrupted calmly. And your mother as well. The FBI is currently conducting searches of their offices in Dallas. It is over, Veronica. Her face contorted with rage as agents firmly guided her into the car. Richard remained on the porch, watching in stunned disbelief as other agents entered our residence, carrying equipment for evidence collection. Mom, he murmured as I turned to follow Gloria back to our vehicle. I was unaware of the full extent of their plan. You must believe me. I paused, observing the countenance of the son I had raised, searching his eyes for a sliver of truth. Perhaps you were not fully cognizant, I conceded, but you knew enough, Richard, and still you chose them over me. As I walked away, his broken voice reached me. Where am I supposed to go now? I did not look back. That question echoed the very inquiry I had faced when he expelled me from my own home. The symmetry was not lost on me, yet unlike my son, I found no satisfaction in his distress, only a profound sorrow for our shared loss. Some betrayals, I was learning, leave wounds too deep for simple absolution. As FBI agents meticulously searched my home, apprehended Veronica, and questioned Richard, I observed from across the street, caught between a sense of vindication and the sting of pain. The bewilderment on my son's face upon realizing I had orchestrated his downfall rapidly morphed into a desperate denial, a claim of ignorance regarding their scheme. Veronica's carefully constructed facade of composure finally crumbled, exposing the calculating criminal she had always been. Concurrently, a part of me recoiled at Richard's pleading question, where am I supposed to go now? Yet I recognized the poetic justice in it. He was experiencing firsthand precisely what he had subjected me to. Some lessons carry a devastating price, but as I departed the residence I would soon reclaim, I understood this confrontation was merely the inaugural step on a lengthier trajectory towards justice and, perhaps, eventual healing. You ought to consume something, Isabella. Gloria gently nudged a container of soup towards me across the hotel desk that had been repurposed as our temporary command center. 3 days had elapsed since the FBI operation, 3 days of providing statements, reviewing evidence, and navigating legal proceedings, leaving me with virtually no opportunity to process the enormity of recent events. I'm not hungry, I replied, my attention fixed on the latest packet of documents Gloria had brought from her office. You haven't eaten properly in days, she insisted. Your body is still recuperating. You require sustenance. I sighed, acknowledging the truth in her words. The physical strain and relentless tension had finally taken their toll. Reluctantly, I opened the container and sampled a spoonful of the chicken broth. That's better. Gloria nodded, a hint of satisfaction in her expression. Now, we should discuss tomorrow's meeting. The meeting she alluded to would be my inaugural face-to-face encounter with Richard since the operation concluded. He had requested it through his legal representative, a young public defender named Marcus Reed, who had contacted Gloria the preceding day. He claims he was unaware of the full scope of the Sterling operation. Gloria continued in a measured tone. He asserts that Veronica deliberately kept him uninformed about nearly everything, and that the power of attorney he manipulated you into signing enabled him to transfer funds from your accounts. A bitter undertone inevitably crept into my voice. He was also uninformed about those two, wasn't he? Gloria's expression softened. I am not defending him, Isabella. I am merely relaying the information provided by his attorney. I placed my spoon down, my appetite having completely vanished. What else does this document indicate? Richard wishes to cooperate fully with the investigation. He has offered to provide detailed testimony regarding Veronica and her parents in exchange for his situation being favourably considered in his own legal proceedings. The notion of his betrayal of them should not have surprised me, yet it did. The Richard I knew had always been steadfastly loyal. Self-preservation instinct, Gloria suggested. The evidence against the Sterlings is overwhelming. He is making the most expedient legal choice. And what does he expect from me? I inquired, although the answer was already forming in my mind. Officially, nothing. The meeting is ostensibly for him to present his perspective on the events. Gloria's skeptical intonation made it clear she suspected a deeper agenda. Unofficially, my impression is that he hopes you will advocate for leniency with the prosecutors. A mother's plea can carry considerable weight. I closed my eyes, utterly exhausted. The prospect of confronting Richard, of listening to his justifications and excuses, caused a pang of pain to tighten in my chest. You are under no obligation to meet him, Gloria reminded me gently. At this juncture you owe him nothing. I am aware, I replied, but I require answers, Gloria. I need to comprehend how my son could transform into someone capable of such actions. The interview room within the federal building was stark and cold. A metal table, unwelcomely chairs, and a large mirror that undoubtedly concealed an observation chamber. I sat with Gloria beside me, my hands clasped on the table to conceal their slight tremor. When the door opened, I barely recognized the man who entered. Richard, my son, usually self-assured and impeccably dressed, appeared disheveled. His customary suit had been replaced by wrinkled khaki trousers and a plain shirt. A faint shadow of stubble on his face indicated he had not shaved in days. "Mom," he said, taking a seat opposite me. His lawyer, a serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat beside him. "Richard," I greeted, endeavouring to maintain a steady voice. A tense silence settled between us, neither of us quite knowing how to initiate this improbable conversation. "Mrs. Hayes," Marcus Reed finally spoke. "My client requested this meeting to clarify certain aspects of the situation that he believes have been subject to misunderstanding." "I am listening," I replied, my gaze fixed on Richard, not his attorney. Richard cleared his throat. "Firstly, I want you to understand that I never intended for things to escalate to this point. When Veronica and I discussed her parents relocating to Phoenix, it was meant to be a temporary arrangement, simply until they secured their own residence. And the power of attorney," I interrupted him, "the one you deceitfully procured from me before my surgery." He lowered his gaze, shame evident. That was Veronica's proposition. She stated it was merely a precautionary measure in case decisions needed to be made while you were recovering. "Yet you employed it to abscond with my house and drain my accounts," I accused. He hesitated, glancing at his lawyer, who offered a subtle nod. "That was entirely Veronica and Raymond. They informed me they were transferring some funds to safer investments for your retirement. I was unaware they were actually engaged in theft." I scrutinized his face, searching for a flicker of truth in his eyes. There was undoubtedly desperation, fear, but was it genuine remorse or merely regret at being apprehended? "The house," I insisted. "You yourself told me I could not return." You stood at the threshold of the home your father and I built and declared it was no longer mine. His eyes remained fixed on the table. Veronica convinced me it was for the best. She insisted the house was too much for you, that you would be happier in a senior living community. He swallowed hard. I believed we were assisting you, he added, referring to his act of expelling me with merely the clothes on my back, leaving my personal belongings in boxes in the garage. The composure I had maintained began to fracture. That was not assistance, Richard. That was cruelty. I understand, he murmured. I understand now. What hold did they have over you? I blurted out. It was the question that had plagued me for days. Veronica and her parents, what leverage did they possess that would compel you to betray your own mother in such a manner? Richard suddenly lifted his head, a look of surprise on his face. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus Reed interjected, we should focus on— No, Richard interrupted. She deserves to know. He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I made some poor financial decisions. I lost a great deal of money, our savings, a portion of our retirement nest egg. I was desperate to recover it before Veronica discovered the truth. Raymond offered assistance. He claimed to have secure investment prospects. He loaned you money? I surmised. Richard nodded, his initial expression crestfallen. Yes, then it grew considerably more complex. I signed documents. I became involved in their ventures without truly comprehending their nature. By the time I grasped what was transpiring, I was already ensnared in several of their fraudulent schemes. They held leverage over you, Gloria observed. They had me in their grasp, Richard corrected bitterly. Veronica made it explicit. If I didn't comply with their objectives, her father would ensure I bore the entire burden of blame. I attempted to process this new information, striving to reconcile it with the son I believed I knew. And my house, my accounts, I prompted. A test of loyalty, he admitted, shoulders slumping with shame. To demonstrate my commitment to the operation, Veronica stated that once the neighborhood acreage was rezoned, we'd generate sufficient funds for me to comfortably relocate you elsewhere. Did you truly believe that? I couldn't mask the incredulity in my voice. I wanted to believe it, he replied softly. It was less arduous than confronting what I was actually doing. The stark candor of his words struck me with full force for the first time since this ordeal commenced. I glimpsed the son I recalled, the boy who, when caught in a falsehood, would eventually confess, regardless of the pain. Richard, I said cautiously, what precisely are you requesting of me today? For the first time he met my gaze. Nothing, Mother. I don't merit your assistance or your pardon. His voice faltered slightly. I needed you to comprehend that I never intended to cause you harm. I was timid and apprehensive. I made dreadful choices. Whatever transpires now, I will accept it. The unadorned sincerity and inherent dignity of his response, so contrary to the frantic justifications I had anticipated, disarmed me. Before I could reply, a knock at the door interrupted our exchange. Agent Rips entered, offering an apologetic nod. Apologies for the interruption, but we have an urgent development. Mrs. Hayes, could you step outside for a moment? In a stark, sterile federal building interview chamber, I finally confronted my son, seeking answers for the perfidy that fractured our family. Instead of the excuses I had braced myself for, Richard unveiled a more convoluted reality. He had become entangled with the sterling enterprise years prior due to financial desperation, effectively becoming their pawn through coercion and manipulation. While his explanation did not absolve his actions, his confession that the property transfer served as a loyalty assessment devised by Veronica offered me my initial glimpse of the son I once recognized. Just as this poignant revelation began to reshape my perspective, Agent Rips burst in with pressing news, signaling a new trajectory in an increasingly complex investigation. Despite everything, I found myself contemplating whether a path forward existed amidst this devastation. Not a return to the past, but a progression towards something distinct, built upon somber truths rather than comfortable delusions. Agent Rips guided me to a modest conference room down the corridor. Gloria followed closely, her typically composed demeanor subtly altered, which immediately put me on edge. "What has transpired?" I inquired as the door swung shut behind us. "We've been implementing new search warrants linked to the Sterling documentation," Rips explained, placing a file on the table. "A team in Dallas unearthed something you must see." She unfurled the file and produced several photographs, arranging them carefully before me. I leaned forward, examining the striking images with mounting bewilderment. They depicted a private medical suite, an array of clinical apparatus, and an individual reclining in a bed. "I fail to comprehend," I stated, looking up. "What bearing does this have on—" The words caught in my throat as my focus settled on the final photograph. The patient was me, unconscious, connected to monitoring devices in the intensive care unit during my recent hospitalization. These items were discovered within a concealed safe in Raymond Sterling's Dallas office. Rips elaborated quietly. Adjacent to them, she placed another collection of documents on the table. My medical records, physician's notes, pharmaceutical orders, and my own clinical charts, which ought to have been maintained under stringent security protocols at Phoenix General Hospital. "How did they procure these?" Gloria questioned, her legal acumen instantly grasping the implications. "That is precisely our concern," Rips responded. "The timestamps on these images do not align with standard visiting hours, and these documents contain information to which family members would not typically have access." A chill coursed through me as I apprehended her unspoken suggestion. Someone within the hospital was complicit with them. Rips nodded gravely. "We have identified a nursing professional who accessed your records on multiple occasions when neither Richard nor Veronica were present. Telephone records indicate numerous communications between this individual and Raymond Sterling." "But why?" I asked, struggling to understand their intense scrutiny of me. Gloria's countenance had grown pale as she perused the documents. "Isabella, observe these medication notations." I followed her pointer to an annotation on one of the charts. "A dosage adjustment in my post-operative pain management." The original prescription had been struck through and substituted with an augmented dose inscribed in different penmanship. "Your recovery deviated from expectations," Rips explained carefully. "The infection necessitated your hospitalization for 21 days, rather than the customary 5 to 7. We are investigating whether it might have been intentionally induced." The implication struck me with the force of a physical blow. "Are you suggesting they attempted—" I couldn't complete the inquiry. "We are not lodging accusations at this juncture," Rips clarified promptly. "However, we are examining the possibility that an individual may have deliberately sought to prolong your hospitalization to afford the Sterlings additional time to execute their stratagems." I clutched the table's edge, suddenly feeling faint. The notion that someone had manipulated my medical care, jeopardizing my life, was almost beyond comprehension. "Does Richard have any awareness of this?" I managed to ask. "Not yet," she replied. "We wish to inform you first, given the profoundly personal nature of this revelation." Gloria placed her hand over mine, her expression somber. "Isabella, should someone have intentionally altered your treatment, this case escalates considerably. We are no longer merely discussing fraud and elder abuse, but potentially—" "I understand," I interrupted, unable to bear hearing those words voiced aloud. The possibility was too abhorrent to confront directly. "There is an additional matter," Rips continued, exhibiting visible unease. "We discovered a life insurance policy in your name, procured 6 months ago. Richard Thompson is designated as the beneficiary." The room seemed to spin. "Richard knew," I whispered, the final vestiges of hope for my son disintegrating. "He had to have known." "Not necessarily," Rips cautioned. "The application bears his signature, but we have already identified several fabricated documents in this case. We must investigate further before drawing conclusions." I closed my eyes, attempting to resist this fresh onslaught of betrayal. If Richard had been apprised of these machinations, if he had been complicit in a threat against my existence, then every word he had spoken in the interview room was a fabrication. That vision of my true son, which I believed I had perceived, was nothing more than another manipulation. "I must see him again," I stated, my eyes opening with renewed determination. "Presently, Mrs. Hayes, with this new intelligence we advise against it," Rips began. "I need to witness his reaction when he hears this," I insisted. "That will be my gauge of his awareness." After 21 years as a compliance officer and a lifetime as a mother, I had cultivated an almost intuitive faculty for detecting deception. I needed to meet Richard's gaze when this bombshell detonated. Rips hesitated, then relented. "We were intending to question him regarding these findings regardless. If you insist on being present, we can make arrangements." Upon our return to the chamber, Richard and his legal counsel were engaged in hushed conversation. His attorney leaned forward, immediately on guard. "Agent Rips, my client has cooperated fully. If you are implying his involvement in any sort of—" "I am not implying anything at this juncture," Rips interrupted. "I am requesting an explanation of these documents." "I cannot provide an explanation because I had no part in it." Richard's voice escalated in alarm. "Veronica handled all our insurance matters. She indicated we were updating our policies. I signed whatever she presented to me." The raw terror in his eyes, not merely the apprehension of repercussions, but genuine horror at what had been perpetrated, revealed more than any verbal account could. My son had been weak, gullible, and morally compromised, yet I did not believe he had knowingly participated in a scheme that could have endangered my life. "Do you comprehend the implications of this, Richard?" I inquired softly. "Your wife and her parents may have been orchestrating something far more sinister than merely appropriating my home." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. "Oh God," he whispered, "what have I done? What have I permitted to occur?" Witnessing my son confront the enormity of his wife's perfidy, I experienced an unexpected surge of empathy. Richard had made egregious errors. He had betrayed me in ways that seemed irredeemable. However, he was also a victim of the Sterling's manipulation, another pawn in a game far more sinister than he himself grasped. "I need to revise my statement," he declared suddenly, looking up with newfound resolve. "I need to disclose everything I know regarding Veronica and her parents. Everything." A devastating disclosure shattered what little remained of my existence. Evidence indicated that the Sterlings had deliberately complicated my medical recovery, potentially even endangering my life. Most shocking of all was the discovery of a life insurance policy on my person, with Richard designated as the beneficiary. When confronted with this evidence, my son's unfeigned horror and astonishment conveyed precisely what I desperately needed to ascertain. Although he had betrayed me profoundly, he was not implicated in this monstrous facet of their scheme. While Richard grappled with the true nature of his wife's actions, his resolve to expose everything suggested that even darker secrets remained to be uncovered. Despite my lingering indignation, I found myself considering that perhaps, amidst this nightmare, the nascent, fragile seeds of redemption might sprout. Not immediate absolution, but perhaps understanding. 17 properties, Agent Callahan announced, unfurling a map across the conference room table, all acquired through identical fraudulent methodologies, all funneled through shell corporations linked to the Sterlings. 2 weeks had elapsed since the startling revelations concerning my medical documentation. I had been relocated to a secure apartment provided by the FBI. Only Gloria and the agents directly assigned to the case were privy to my whereabouts. The investigation had expanded significantly, exposing a criminal network far more extensive than initially surmised. And the nurse? I posed the question that had plagued me since learning someone might have deliberately complicated my recovery. Miranda Jenkins, Rips replied, sliding a personnel file toward me. She served in post-operative care for 3 years. We have confirmed she received multiple payments from a Sterling shell company, totaling over $25,000 in the past 6 months. She is admitted to manipulating my medication. I needed to grasp the complete truth, however agonizing. Callahan and Rips exchanged glances. She is cooperating, Callahan stated cautiously. According to her deposition, she was instructed to prolong your recuperation period by adjusting specific pharmaceuticals and introducing a minor bacterial contamination during IV fluid exchanges. My stomach churned at the cold, clinical detachment of that explanation, which in reality signified calculated harm. She could have ended my life. She claims she calibrated the contamination to induce prolonged hospitalization without posing a risk to your life, Rips added, her tone laced with revulsion, as if that mitigated her actions. And Veronica, she orchestrated all of this? The question felt almost rhetorical. I already knew the answer. Raymond Sterling initiated contact with Jenkins, Callahan confirmed. However, evidence indicates Veronica devised the specifics. Text messages recovered from her mobile device contain precise inquiries regarding your treatment schedule, pharmaceutical regimen, and anticipated discharge dates. I closed my eyes momentarily, still attempting to process the deliberate cruelty of it all. My own daughter-in-law had intentionally prolonged my suffering to buy time for their enterprise. And Richard's involvement? Gloria inquired, voicing my own unspoken concern. We found no evidence suggesting he was aware of the medical interference, Rips stated. His cooperation has been extensive, and we believe it to be genuine. The prosecution deems his testimony crucial to substantiating the case against the Sterlings. A modicum of relief, at least. My son had betrayed me, but he had not conspired to inflict physical harm. The distinction was significant, though it did not erase the pain of his actions. Is there anything further you wish to review? Callahan inquired, sliding another folder my way. This was retrieved from Veronica's private email. Within it lay a series of correspondences between Veronica and her parents, dating back nearly 2 years. They had meticulously formulated a strategy to seize my assets, commencing with isolating me from kin and companions, then progressively appropriating my financial affairs, and finally relocating me to a long-term care facility once they had secured complete legal dominion. That chilling, methodical approach made my hands tremble as I read. They had targeted me long before my hip surgery became necessary, viewing my physical decline as an opportune moment to exploit. My hospitalization merely accelerated their timeline. And this, Callahan continued, is perhaps the most disturbing. He placed before me a printed advertisement for an opulent assisted living community in Arizona. It was accompanied by an email from Veronica to her parents. The ideal locale for Isabella once everything is finalized, it read. Secluded with minimal oversight, and the memory care unit accepts residents without excessive medical documentation. Once she is situated there, we will possess absolute control over all visits and communications. They had intended to institutionalize me, effectively imprisoning me in a place far removed from anyone who knew me, where I would be easily forgotten while they reveled in their ill-gotten gains. There will be additional charges based on this evidence, Rips explained. Elder abuse, conspiracy, and potentially attempted homicide, contingent upon the prosecutor's interpretation of the medical manipulation. I nodded, too overwhelmed to articulate a response immediately. The sheer magnitude of their machinations, the calculated destruction not only of my financial security, but also my freedom and dignity, was almost impossible to comprehend. When may I return home? I finally managed to ask, the question that had preoccupied me for weeks. The forensic team concluded their work at your residence yesterday, Callahan replied. Technically, you could return now, though we recommend awaiting confirmation of no security risks. I wish to go today, I responded firmly. I need to be back in my own environment. Gloria squeezed my hand in support. I will stay with you for the initial few days. We can implement additional security measures if necessary. Rips nodded. We can arrange that, but there is another matter to address. She paused briefly. Richard has requested another meeting with you. He will be transferred to a minimum security correctional facility pending his trial, and he has asked to see you before that transition. My initial inclination was to refuse. The wound of his betrayal remained raw, and I doubted my emotional fortitude for another confrontation. Yet something within me, perhaps the maternal instinct recalling the boy he once was, could not decline the request. Tomorrow morning, if that is agreeable, Rips responded when I inquired directly. Following that, his visitations will be significantly restricted until the legal proceedings are concluded. I nodded slowly. I will see him then. That same afternoon, I stood on my porch, key in hand, hesitating before inserting it into the lock. The exterior appeared unchanged, but I knew that within strangers had intruded upon my sanctuary. They had plotted my undoing in a place that should have represented safety. Take your time, Gloria murmured beside me. This will be difficult. I drew a deep breath and turned the key. The familiar fragrance of my dwelling, the gleam of polished wood, the well-worn books, the faint scent of lavender from the sachets I placed in the closets, were now overlaid with foreign perfumes and cleaning agents. Traces of the Sterling's brief occupancy were evident in subtle details. The furniture had been barely disturbed. My cherished orchid was absent from the sunroom. New draperies hung in the living area. In my study, Anthony's antique writing desk had been repositioned, facing the door rather than the window where he habitually worked, gazing out at the garden. That minor alteration affected me more profoundly than anticipated. They had effaced our routines, our shared history. We can restore everything to its former state, Gloria assured me, perceiving my distress. Make it yours again. I nodded slowly, moving through each room, noting the alterations and violations. In the master bedroom, my garments were gone from the wardrobe, supplanted by Veronica's designer attire. My simple jewelry repository had been emptied. The pieces Anthony had gifted me over the many years of our life together were nowhere to be found. The FBI recovered most of your jewelry from the Sterling safe deposit box, Rips had informed me earlier. They will return them once their processing as evidence is complete. It offered scant solace, knowing that strangers had handled those intimate mementos of my marriage, valuing them solely for their monetary worth, not their sentimental significance. In the kitchen, my collection of handwritten recipe cards, including those from my mother and grandmother, irreplaceable heirlooms, had been discarded, replaced by gleaming modern cookbooks that clearly had never been utilized. That apparent disdain felt deeply personal, as if they had erased my family's legacy, inflicting a wound more profound than mere financial larceny. As I surveyed the damage, a peculiar calmness descended upon me. This house, these possessions had been desecrated, yet they remained mine. I had endured. I had fought and reclaimed what had been taken. The Sterling family had underestimated my resilience, my capabilities, and my unwavering resolve. I am staying, I decided, looking at Gloria. Tonight, in my home. Are you certain? She inquired with concern. Could we not commence anew tomorrow? I am certain, I replied, my voice imbued with renewed strength. I will not permit them to keep me away from my own residence for another night. As dusk settled, I sat on the rear veranda with a cup of tea, observing the twilight descend upon the garden Anthony and I had cultivated decades prior. The roses required pruning. The hydrangeas were somewhat neglected, but the essence of what we had created persisted. Tomorrow would bring further arduous conversations with Richard, more legal proceedings, and the protracted process of rebuilding my home and my life. But tonight I had reclaimed my space. It marked a beginning. As the investigation advanced, I confronted a terrifying reality. Veronica and her parents had concocted a scheme far more perverse than simple larceny. Evidence revealed they had deliberately impeded my medical recovery with the complicity of a compromised nursing professional. Their intention was to institutionalize me in an isolated facility, and they had been monitoring me for nearly 2 years. Although Richard appeared oblivious to the most sinister aspects of the conspiracy, the calculated barbarity of what they had devised for me was too monstrous to fully comprehend. Standing within my violated residence, observing how they had erased the vestiges of my married life, I understood that a lengthy journey lay ahead, not merely to recover my property, but also to regain my sense of security. The following day, I was scheduled for another meeting with my son before his transfer to a facility pending his trial. It was a conversation I dreaded but knew was unavoidable if I were to grasp the full extent of our family's unraveling. The detention center's visitation area was far brighter than I'd anticipated, with the harsh glare of fluorescent tubes reflecting off pale, sickly yellow walls, a futile attempt at creating a welcoming atmosphere. Richard sat at a small utilitarian table, clad in a standard-issue uniform that seemed to hang on his emaciated frame. He had lost a significant amount of weight since his apprehension, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken from nights devoid of sleep. "Thank you for coming," he offered softly as I took the seat opposite him. This time, no legal counsel was present. "It was your choice," they had informed me. "You wish to speak with me?" I inquired, carefully modulating my tone. "Here I am." He offered a slight nod, his gaze falling to his hands, which he clasped tightly on the table's surface. "They informed me about the nurse, about Veronica and her parents' scheme for you." "Indeed," I replied, offering no further elaboration, simply waiting. "I solemnly swear, Mother, I was unaware." His voice wavered. "I knew they desired your home, your wealth. That was abhorrent enough, unforgivable even, but I never fathomed they would escalate to such depths." He fell silent, unable to articulate the full horror of their machinations. "I believe you," I stated plainly. He jolted, looking up, his expression one of surprise. "You credit me on that specific detail?" "Yes, I have witnessed sufficient evidence to conclude you are not privy to their intentions to cause me physical harm or to have me institutionalized." My tone was measured, detached, but you were fully aware of their scheme to seize everything I owned. You actively participated in that appropriation. He winced but offered no denial. "Yes, why, Richard?" The question that had tormented me for weeks finally found voice. "You were raised with every conceivable advantage. Your father and I instilled in you principles of integrity, respect for fellow human beings. What became of that young man? Richard remained in silence for an extended period, as if gathering the fortitude for his confession. I have posed that very same question to myself each night in my cell, he finally responded. The facile explanation is my own timidity. I feared alienating Veronica if I did not comply with her wishes. I was apprehensive of the financial repercussions should her father expose my prior complicity in their deceptions. And the more challenging answer, I pressed. The more difficult truth, he stated, meeting my gaze directly, is that at some juncture I began to believe I was entitled to more than I had legitimately earned, that it was justifiable to resort to deceit if that was the means to attain my desires. His voice dwindled to a mere whisper. I transformed into someone I no longer recognize, someone your father would have regarded with profound disappointment. The mention of Anthony, who had beamed with such pride in our son, who had envisioned the man he would become, sent a sharp pang through my chest. Your father would indeed be dismayed, I conceded without hesitation, and so am I. However, I suspect what would displease him most would not be your errors in judgment, but rather your betrayal of your own core values to conceal them. Richard nodded, absorbing this truth without protest. The prosecution has extended a plea arrangement, 5 years, reducible to 3 with exemplary conduct, in exchange for my complete testimony against Veronica and her parents. Do you intend to accept it? Yes, he replied without a moment's pause. It represents more leniency than I deserve. A brief silence descended between us, the weight of the ramifications palpable. My son was destined for years of incarceration. The life he had known had vanished irrevocably. The promising future Anthony and I had envisioned for him had been reduced to this stark, sterile visitation room, illuminated by unforgiving fluorescent light. I discovered something in the house yesterday, I announced, shifting the conversation's focus. Tucked away at the very bottom of your father's desk drawer, I retrieved a worn envelope from my handbag. It's a letter he penned to you shortly before his passing. He entrusted me with its delivery when I deemed the moment most opportune. I believe that moment has arrived. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the envelope, turning it over to regard his name inscribed in Anthony's distinctive hand. I had no inkling this existed, he murmured. During his final months he composed several missives, I explained. This was the last one. I observed him as he carefully unfolded the paper as if it might disintegrate under his touch. I remained silent, watching the spectrum of emotions flicker across his face. Sorrow, regret, and finally a semblance of peace. Upon concluding the letter, he meticulously refolded it, pressing it against his chest for a brief moment before returning it to its envelope. Thank you for bringing this, he said, his voice now more steady. I needed to hear his voice once more, even under these circumstances. He gestured vaguely towards our surroundings. And what do you envision for yourself afterward? I inquired. Once you have served your sentence? The question appeared to catch him by surprise. Perhaps he had not allowed himself to contemplate such a distant future. Perhaps he had not expected me to envision a future for him beyond retribution. I am uncertain, he admitted. My career and my financial stability are in ruins. Naturally, my reputation. He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed the totality of his former life's collapse. You will need to reconstruct yourself, I advised him, not merely in practical terms, but morally as well. That is the most arduous undertaking. I understand. He paused for a beat, then posed the question that weighed most heavily upon him. Will you ever be capable of granting me forgiveness, Mother? I deliberated carefully before responding, unwilling to offer facile platitudes or insincere assurances. Forgiveness is not a singular event, Richard. It is a progression. At this juncture, I am still processing the anguish, the betrayal, the profound impact of discovering the person you have become. I looked directly into his eyes. I cannot definitively state if complete absolution is attainable, but this much I know. You remain my son. That biological reality is immutable. The trajectory of our relationship from this point forward will be contingent upon the choices you make from this moment onward. He nodded, accepting this qualified answer with an unexpected equanimity. That is fair, more than fair. Our allotted time was drawing to a close. A guard approached, signaling his readiness to escort Richard back to his cell. As we rose to bid farewell, he posed one final inquiry. The house, will you remain there after all that has transpired? Yes, I affirmed with conviction. It is my home. I will not permit their actions to compel me to abandon the life your father and I established. Good, he murmured softly. Father would have wished for that. As I watched him depart, his shoulders held high despite the overwhelming circumstances, I experienced an unexpected sense of resolution. It was not a process of healing, which would require considerably more time, but it marked the commencement of a new chapter. My son had made egregious choices. He had betrayed me in ways that might never be fully mended. Yet beneath the man who had colluded in the sterling scheme, fragments of the boy I had nurtured still resided. Outside the confines of the detention center, Gloria awaited me in her vehicle, a steadfast presence of support that I had come to rely upon during these trying weeks. How did it go? She inquired as I settled into the passenger seat. As favorably as one could anticipate, I replied, observing the autumnal leaves pirouetting in the parking lot. He has accepted a plea bargain, 5 years, potentially reduced to 3. And how do you feel about that? I contemplated for a moment, allowing myself to fully engage with my emotions. Sorrowful, relieved, still incensed, but to a lesser degree than before. Most aspects are now clear to me regarding the events that transpired and the path ahead. Gloria nodded, her understanding conveyed without the need for further explanation. As we drove back towards my true sanctuary, a home being reclaimed and undergoing restoration, my thoughts turned to the entirety of my recent experiences. From the shock of betrayal to the pursuit of justice, from the horror of uncovering their machinations against me, to reaching this juncture of precarious reconciliation. The journey ahead remained complex. The legal proceedings against Veronica and her parents would extend for many months. Securing my assets in their entirety and rebuilding my life would necessitate a considerable amount of time. My relationship with my son, should it prove salvageable, would demand years of unwavering effort. However, for the first time since awakening from surgery, to discover my world had been irrevocably shattered, I felt a genuine flicker of hope for the future, not because the path would be uncomplicated, but because I had unearthed an inner fortitude I had never imagined possessing. As we turned onto my street, the setting sun cast a golden luminescence upon the facade of my residence, a light that seemed to portend new beginnings amidst so many endings. In the stark, unforgiving illumination of the detention center's visitation room, I finally heard the unvarnished truth emanating from my son's lips. His acknowledgement of moral failing, of having deviated from the values his father and I had diligently imparted. Although I perceived his genuine distress regarding the physical harm Veronica and her parents had contemplated against me, he accepted full accountability for the misappropriation of my assets, facing a plea agreement that would confine him to prison for a protracted period. I presented him with his father's final offering, a letter penned by Anthony prior to his demise, preserved for the precise moment Richard would find himself in dire need. His inquiry concerning forgiveness lacked a simple resolution. All I could offer was the candid acknowledgement of the lengthy and uncertain road that lay ahead for both of us. Departing the detention centre, I experienced an unexpected clarity. It was not yet a state of healing, but it represented the initial stride towards the new reality that awaited us both. With my home undergoing restoration and the pursuit of justice in motion, I found myself anticipating what lay ahead rather than being tethered to the past, recognizing an inner strength I had never previously acknowledged. "That's the final one," Gloria remarked, carefully placing a family portrait onto a newly installed shelf in my living room. 6 months had elapsed since my encounter with Richard at the detention centre. 6 months dedicated to the patient reconstruction of my home, my financial standing, and my sense of security. "It looks precisely as it should," I commented, surveying the living room. The furnishings had been returned to their rightful positions. New curtains reflecting my preferred styles had been hung, and the subtle imprints of the Sterling's brief occupancy had been meticulously eradicated. "Better than right," Gloria countered, drawing my attention to the new security panel near the doorway. "It is more secure now than ever before." She was correct. Everything I had endured had resulted in practical enhancements: reinforced locks, a comprehensive security system, and updated protocols for my financial accounts. The vulnerabilities that had permitted the Sterlings to infiltrate my life had been identified and fortified against any future threats. "The roses are blooming once more," I added, glancing out the window at my garden, where nascent spring shoots were beginning to emerge. I had devoted hours to replanting and nurturing the flower beds that had languished during the Sterling's occupation, finding in the process an unexpected form of therapy and a reconnection with the earth. Gloria smiled, discerning the metaphor embedded in my words. If they are returning with proper care and time, recovery is indeed possible. The preceding months had witnessed substantial progress. Veronica and her parents were confronted with a cascade of federal charges encompassing fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and attempted homicide for the medical manipulation. The evidence marshalled against them, bolstered by Richard's detailed testimony, proved overwhelming. To circumvent a trial and the certainty of lengthy prison sentences, they acceded to plea bargains. Raymond received a sentence of 20 years, Claudia 15, and Veronica 18. The sheer scale of their criminal enterprise was revealed to be even more extensive than initially surmised, with victims identified across 3 states. The nurse who had altered my medication was sentenced to 8 years, her term reduced to 5 in exchange for her testimony regarding other vulnerable patients the Sterlings had targeted. The investigation unearthed 2 prior instances of elderly homeowners who had died under suspicious circumstances subsequent to their involvement with Sterling investment properties, which were now being re-examined as potential homicides. My neighbourhood had been spared from their predatory scheme. With the Sterlings' operation comprehensively exposed, the properties they had illicitly acquired were in the process of being returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. The community had coalesced, establishing a support network for seniors designed to safeguard them from similar future depredations. "Have you made a decision regarding the visit?" Gloria inquired, gently drawing me from my reflections as she poured 2 glasses of iced tea. The visit she referenced was Richard's latest request. Now, after 3 months of confinement in a minimum security facility, he had inquired if I would consider seeing him again. His letters, dispatched weekly since his incarceration commenced, had consistently respected my boundaries, acknowledging the absence of forgiveness, but consistently conveying his remorse and detailing his efforts toward rehabilitation. "I believe I shall go," I stated, surprised by the certainty in my voice. "Not next week, however. I have the garden club fundraiser, but perhaps the week after." Gloria nodded, her expression carefully neutral. You appear more at peace with the prospect now than you did a month ago. I dreamt of Anthony last night, I explained, and that memory brought me an unexpected solace. We were on the porch swing, conversing as we used to. He told me something that resonated deeply. He said, healing doesn't mean erasing the wound, it means finding purpose in the scar. That sounds precisely like Anthony, Gloria commented with a gentle smile. He always managed to extract wisdom from periods of hardship. I awoke this morning with Richard on my mind, I continued, and how certain wounds never fully close, but perhaps they can still lead to something meaningful. Not a return to what was, but a progression towards something new. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. On the display of my new tablet, connected to the security camera system, I observed a delivery person holding a substantial floral arrangement. Expecting flowers? Gloria inquired as she moved towards the door. No, I replied, a familiar weariness suddenly washing over me. Distrust, despite the current robust security measures, did not dissipate easily. Gloria verified the delivery person's credentials before accepting the bouquet. It was a magnificent arrangement of lilies and irises, my personal favorites. The accompanying card bore a simple inscription, "Thinking of you on your birthday, your neighbour, Eleanor Jameson." I smiled, touched by the thoughtful gesture. Eleanor Jameson had moved into the house across the street 3 months prior, a retired literature professor possessing a quick wit and a similar sensibility. We had gradually cultivated a friendship, sharing gardening insights and literary recommendations. She had lost her husband around the same time I had lost Anthony, which immediately forged a bond of mutual understanding between us. What a lovely sentiment, Gloria commented, admiring the arrangement. You are cultivating a very strong community here. She was right. Following the Sterling scandal, I had made a conscious decision to reinforce my connections rather than retreat into isolation. The neighborhood book club I had initiated already convened monthly in my living room. The senior community center, where I volunteered twice weekly, had become a source of invaluable friendships. The garden club had welcomed me with open arms, appreciating my expertise with heirloom roses, even appointing me as the head of the annual exhibition. These genuine, freely chosen connections had become my most robust defense against any future vulnerability. I have been contemplating the foundation, I stated as we settled onto the patio swing with our cups of tea. The Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation, I clarified, referring to the organization my husband had established prior to his passing to fund studies on the rare cardiac condition that had led to his demise. And what about it? Gloria inquired. I wish to expand its mission, I explained, to incorporate a division dedicated to elder protection, legal advocacy, fraud prevention, educational initiatives, and victim support services. Gloria's eyes lit up with evident interest. Utilizing your experience to assist others in analogous situations. Precisely. The Sterlings victimized dozens of individuals before they targeted me. Most lacked my resources or the acumen to defend themselves. I aim to alter that reality for others. That is a truly remarkable idea, Gloria remarked warmly. Anthony would be immensely proud. I believe so too, I replied, gazing out at the neighborhood where I had successfully re-established my sense of home and security, finding purpose in the scar, as he used to say. As the afternoon transitioned into evening, we remained in comfortable silence, observing neighbors returning from their work and children engaged in play in nearby yards, the rhythm of the community beating around us. The trauma of my recent ordeal would never entirely dissipate. There would always be moments of heightened alertness, echoes of betrayal that would surface unexpectedly. However, those scars no longer dictated my daily existence. They had transmuted into a source of wisdom, profound empathy, and a revitalized sense of purpose. Later, after Gloria had departed, I sat at Anthony's desk, now appropriately positioned before the garden window, and commenced outlining the structure of the foundation's new division. As I worked, I felt a sense of profound coherence, as if a cycle were reaching its culmination. The Sterlings had targeted me because they perceived a vulnerable, easily exploitable elderly widow. The foundation would transform that painful episode into a bulwark of protection for countless others. Tomorrow would herald new challenges: a meeting with the foundation board, preparations for my impending visit to Richard, and the restoration of the garden that had been neglected during my absence. But for the first time in many months, I looked forward to these challenges with genuine enthusiasm, not merely with determination. My phone rang, interrupting my work. It was Eleanor, my neighbour from across the street, calling to confirm the successful arrival of the flowers and to extend an invitation to a chamber music concert the following weekend. As we conversed, I grasped the profound transformation my life had undergone in the 6 months since reclaiming my home. The betrayal had fractured something fundamental within me: my inherent trust in family, in the protective sanctuary that familiar surroundings are meant to provide. Yet from that rupture, new strengths had emerged, new connections forged, and a different purpose that perhaps would never have materialized otherwise. Finding purpose in the scar, I murmured to myself as I concluded the call. Anthony's wisdom reverberated in my mind, not erasing the wound, but enabling its metamorphosis into something meaningful, into something that, with the passage of time, could blossom into a form of beauty. 6 months after confronting Richard, I find myself navigating a phase of unexpected renewal. As my home is meticulously restored and the garden bursts into bloom once more, I receive news that Veronica and her parents have accepted lengthy prison sentences. Their extensive criminal network definitively dismantled. The neighborhood they so ruthlessly targeted has united in a collective defense. Concurrently, I have cultivated new friendships and community ties that enrich my daily existence. When Richard requests another visit at the minimum security prison, I decide, inspired by a dream involving Anthony, that I am prepared to take that step, not with the aim of erasing past events, but of extracting meaning from the painful experience. That purpose materializes concretely in my proposal to expand the Anthony Miller Medical Research Foundation to encompass elder protection services, thereby transforming my personal trauma into a protective shield for others who might be similarly victimized. As I embrace this new chapter, I recognize that while the betrayal irrevocably damaged something essential within me, that rupture paradoxically created space for unanticipated growth, novel connections, and a deeper comprehension of what truly holds significance. In the time that remains, this narrative serves as a potent reminder that wickedness will, sooner or later, be unmasked and duly punished, whereas those who steadfastly maintain an upright heart shall ultimately discover the justice and tranquility they rightfully deserve.